One of the early writers on this topic was a very prescient fellow by the name of Derek DeSola Price, who was charting the history of how science has grown. And he wrote in 1963, "It is clear that science cannot go up another 2 orders of magnitude as it has climbed the last 5. Scientific doomsday is therefore less than a century away," and he published that nearly half a century ago. Now, innovation will not disappear overnight. For the foreseeable future, you're going to have new and upgraded and improved electronic widgets that you can choose from. We'll continue to have innovation for some time. But innovation is going to continue to decline in productivity. I don't see any way to reverse this. But it will decline in productivity, I think, slowly over a period of several decades. But by current trends, in another generation or so, innovation will have lost nearly 50% of its productivity, at least our current system of innovation. Industries and nations will begin to realize that it is no longer productive to invest in innovation. Now, there is one hopeful sign in this, and that is that innovation is still profitable and is becoming increasingly profitable in emerging nations, in the third world, particularly in lower cost products that are suitable to those nations. Emerging nations still have much potential to innovate, and if I was an investor, I think I might be looking at some of the potential in some of these emerging nations. Their costs are lower, and their companies can profit from simple innovations that are not profitable in industrialized nations. And soon the emerging nations, I think, are going to be major players in innovation worldwide. Very soon, China is going to overtake Japan in the number of patents that it holds. Researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology are trying to produce a laptop computer that will sell for $35. And over recent decades, Brazil has established itself as a leader in aircraft production. I flew here from Denver in one of those planes made in Brazil. But even in emerging nations, in time, they will go through the same process. They will go through the same process of increasing complexity, increasing costs, and diminishing returns. Now, one of our biggest challenges for the future will be, as I see it, a set of major societal problems that will converge over the next 20 to 30 years. And let me go over these briefly. I'm sure you will recognize all of these. What you may not have recognized is that they are going to converge almost simultaneously. Funding retirements for the baby boom generation, which includes me and I think a number of you in this room. Continuing increases in the cost of health care, replacing our decaying infrastructure, particularly a problem in this country, adapting to climate change and repairing environmental damage, developing new sources of energy. I don't like this, but I think in all likelihood, continued high military costs, and increasing costs of innovation. Now, these problems, as I say, will converge over the next 20 to 30 years, perhaps over the next 10 to 30 years or so. Individually, I think any one of these problems would be tractable. Individually, we could probably afford any one of them. Converging at once, converging more or less simultaneously, I think they're going to present us with major fiscal challenges. One of the disturbing aspects of addressing these problems is that solving them seems to generate no new wealth. We must solve these problems just to maintain the status quo. Increasing complexity and costliness to maintain the status quo is what undermined the Roman Empire. Let me conclude by summing up some of the important points about complexity and problem solving. Before I do that, we're going to have to address these converging problems at a time when, firstly, net energy will be declining and energy will be more expensive, taking a larger share of household budgets. And innovation, I think, will continue to decline in productivity, making it less able to generate new growth or produce increased technical efficiency. Okay, let's move on to the dilemma of problem solving, then I'll wrap up in just a few minutes here. I think I'm almost out of time. Problems are inevitable, of course. No society can expect to get by without problems. This makes the process of increasing complexity inevitable, inexorable. Increasing complexity produces increasing costs and diminishing returns. When problems are countered, the cost of solving them usually appears acceptable. The damage comes from cumulative costs. Societies become vulnerable to collapse through the mundane process of solving problems. Now, it's also worthwhile, I think, given that we've just been through an election, to make a few points about leadership. These slides actually come from a conference on ethics that I was in a couple of years ago. I think we would all agree that ethical leaders attempt to solve societal problems. And if we go back to our Roman Empire example, everything the Roman emperors did was a logical response to their circumstances. They acted ethically. If they hadn't done the things that they did, the empire would have collapsed even sooner. But ethical decision-making can set in motion long-term consequences that may ultimately result in catastrophe. We can see this process today in operation as it was in the past. This is President Obama signing the financial bailout bill a couple of years ago. Now, there are alternatives when confronting problems of complexity, when confronting problems that need to be solved. And I'd like to go over these very briefly. There isn't time to discuss them in detail, but I'd like to suggest them to you to think about. So what can you do when you have a problem and it's going to be costly to solve? Well, one solution is that you accept and pay the costs, of course. But another solution is that you shift or defer the costs, which the Romans did by debasing the silver currency, and which we do by borrowing money. Another alternative, and this is characteristic of how we live, is that you find subsidies to pay the costs. We are subsidized by fossil fuels. That is how we pay the cost of our complex problem solving. Another approach is to reconnect costs and benefits. This works particularly well within medium-sized institutions. Back when I worked in the government, and one of the reasons why I took an early retirement out of the government was because they kept imposing more and more administrative burdens on lower-level employees. The advantages of those administrative burdens accrued at the top of the hierarchy among the leadership, but the costs were paid at the bottom among ordinary employees, so the costs and benefits didn't connect. So the cost of complexity could never constrain complexity. If you want to constrain complexity, the costs and benefits have to be connected somehow. And the final solution, the final approach is don't solve the problem. And of course, this is something that we decide to do all the time. Okay, I'm almost done. What do we need to do? I wish I could give you a simple answer. I wish there was a one-liner that would make all of this just go away or seem better. But there are no simple answers to ensuring a prosperous future. But we do need one thing, and that's that we need an adult conversation. And that is what we lack in this country. We certainly lacked it in the recent election. In fact, we lack it in every election. Our political system is dysfunctional. They do not operate as adults. And we, the electorate, have allowed them to get away with it. So here's some of the things that I think we need to have an adult conversation about. Firstly, will household wealth grow in the future as we have known it in recent decades? And what are the consequences if it doesn't? Secondly, what are we going to do about energy? We heard some good talks this morning about some alternatives, some possibilities. But those really need to be scaled up on a massive level and very quickly. Will we be facing an economy in a steady state or in decline? There are people who advocate what's called a steady state economy. I am not one of them. I don't advocate a steady state economy. But the results of the innovation research made me wonder if, in fact, that might be what we're heading for. And a steady state economy, I think, would have repercussions in employment levels, in well-being, in popular discontent that would not be desirable. And do we want to pay the cost of solving our problems? I think this is something that we need to have, again, this adult conversation about. And with that, I have talked for way too long, and I thank you for your patience.